Hello, everybody. Hello, welcome back. So this session is called the Mechanical Licensing Collective Different Perspectives. I will be a moderator and sort of also a speaker for this one, kind of doing double duty. So my name is Serona Elton. I am a professor and the director of the music industry program at the University of Miami Frost School of Music. And I'm also a former MIA president. And have been a member for about 14 years. So I'm always happy to be a part of MIA. I'm also, in this case, and for this discussion, I am also the head of educational partnerships at the Mechanical Licensing Collective, or the MLC. And in that role, I do a couple of things, but one of which is to work with academic institutions and music industry programs. And we did a MIA Meets back in the fall about that. And a lot of you have connected with us about that since then. I have a little more information to share about that at the very end as well. So I'd like to introduce you to my co-panelists for this session. So the first is Kay Hanley. There's Kay. She could give a wave.
Hey.
So for a minute here. So Kay began her career as the lead singer of Boston-based alternative rock band Letters to Cleo that released 3 acclaimed albums. She later expanded her role as a singer and songwriter, providing the singer voice for Rachel Lee Cook's character Josie in the Universal Pictures feature Josie and the Pussycat, and performing cover versions of Nick Lowe's Cruel to Be Kind and Cheap Trick's I Want You to Want Me in Touchstone Pictures film 10 Things I Hate About You. Today, she is a Peabody Award-winning music composer for animated television, penning original songs for shows like Disney Junior's hit series Vampirina. Am I saying that right? Probably not.
No, that's right. That's right.
Okay. And Doc McStuffins, DreamWorks, Harvey Street Kids, Warner Brother Cartoon Network's DC Superhero Girls, and an upcoming Netflix series, Ada Twist Scientist. She is one of the 2 co-executive directors of the Songwriters of North America, SONA for short, a nonprofit advocacy organization that fights for the protection and value of songs and songwriters in the digital music marketplace. As a result of her advocacy work, she serves as the vice chair of the MLC's Unclaimed Royalties Oversight Committee as a representative of songwriters. So hi, Kay.
Hi, Serona. It's great to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks. And my other panelist joining me is Bob Bruderman. Go ahead and wave, Bob, wave. Hi, everybody. Okay, so Bob grew up playing saxophone and guitar, and full disclosure, he also graduated from the University of Miami, but that was before my time as a professor and after my time as a student, I think. He worked at Sony Music Entertainment for 11 years, holding a wide range of roles. I first met Bob at Sony. We got to work together there. In 2013, he joined Kobalt and now serves as the Executive Vice President of Global Digital Partnerships at Kobalt Music Group. He's responsible for leading the digital commercial partnership strategy and licensing efforts globally for Kobalt Publishing and AWOL, which is a part of the Kobalt family, working with a wide range of startup digital services, as well as established players like Amazon, Apple, Facebook, you know those names. He is also a founding member of the DDEX licensing group. We've had a lot of talk about analytics, a lot of talk about data this summit. So if you don't know what DDEX is, DDEX, check it out. And he works closely with a number of industry groups to ensure that intellectual property interests of songwriters and artists are protected. He is also on the board of directors of the MLC. So welcome, Bob. All right, there's Bob. So just to give a little bit of insight as well before we jump into more detail. So the MLC is governed by a board of directors and also 3 different advisory committees. The creation of those committees, exactly who sits on those committees in terms of how many songwriters, how many publishers, how many digital services, All of that is actually laid out in section 115 of the law. And so Bob is on the board of directors and Kay is on one of the committees. They are not MLC employees. They are part of our overall oversight. So just so you know that, although I am an employee. Okay, so let's just jump right in then. Just to give everybody a bit of context, right? The Music Modernization Act of 2018 was actually made up of 3 different titles. Title 1 was called the Musical Works Modernization Act, and it did a few key things that relate to what we're talking about in this session. It created a new blanket compulsory mechanical license for digital uses, specifically interactive streaming and downloads, which became available on January 1st, 2021. It also created the MLC to administer the blanket license, including collecting and distributing royalties. And it mandated the creation and maintenance of a publicly available database of musical works ownership information. And so what I'd like to start off with, and I'm going to actually come to you first on this one, Bob, is what was happening in the industry that led to the MMA? How did we get here?
Yeah, well, again, thanks for having me, Serona, and nice to meet everybody. Yeah, I mean, at a macro level, it was pretty chaotic in the industry from a licensing perspective. You had a completely archaic system of licensing mechanical rights in the United States that really kind of had been upturned in the digital age, first through piracy, then through the establishment of the download stores. And then I think it was exacerbated by multiples in the streaming era. What happened essentially was that you had primarily record labels handling mechanical royalties in the United States for publishing and dealing with publishers. And for a number of reasons, but ultimately what happened was the streaming services took responsibility for that. And I think everyone, we're almost on the 10-year mark, I believe, of when Spotify launched in the United States. I think it was mid-July of 2011. And at that point, in a sense, the labels were often sister companies of the publishers, for decades. The writers were the artists in many cases, right? And there was a much more close relationship that wasn't always great between music publishers and record labels. So because the labels were the manufacturers and distribution agents of their own recordings and CDs and cassettes, et cetera, all of the mechanicals came through them. That changed in the streaming world. And what happened there is you ended up having because you had the entire world's content available on these streaming services, you had to clear millions and millions, tens and tens of millions of tracks and pay them correctly. And there was a major problem with that in terms of how that was being done from an operational standpoint and from a clearance perspective. But that was largely because the law was archaic. The whole licensing process was archaic. So from my personal perspective, no one could do that the proper way. Always the music content would not be available, at least legitimately, on any service, because it was finding a needle in a haystack in many cases for writers. And I'm not trying to give a pass to people for not clearing things in the right way, but it's much, much different than how that worked around the rest of the world. So that gridlock really, and a number of lawsuits ended up kind of making everyone go, boy, we really need to address this now, because we want people to stay in the market. We don't want to go back to the piracy age. And we want to have clarity for both labels, publishers, and DSPs to build the ecosystem of the future. And litigation is no way for more risk capital to come into the music industry and to launch new and exciting things when they think everyone's suing each other. So that ultimately was, from my perspective, the backbone of trying to get us a deal that kind of modernizes the licensing landscape for music. I hope that wasn't too long of an answer, Serona.
No, I was really hoping we get in there. It helps give context to everything.
Yeah.
Hey, how were songwriters feeling about how all this was working before the MMA?
I'm really glad you gave that context, Bob. Sorry, this is my first time on Zoom. I don't understand how to do all this stuff. So for songwriters, this, just to back up a little bit. So back in the olden days, when albums were sold, the way a songwriter would get paid was through a mechanical royalty. So a songwriter would get a cut on an album, and the album would be sold, and the songwriter would receive a mechanical royalty. So a lot of songwriters weren't the artist, weren't the performer, didn't go on tour. They were purely songwriters. And so this was, a way that people made a living, was through this mechanical for a very, very long time. Of course, when album sales ceased to be a thing, sales just evaporated almost overnight, it seemed. But I mean, really, album sales just really collapsed. And there was no real replacement for that. So songwriters, and then on top of that, we had the consent decrees. So songwriters were uniquely screwed in the streaming music economy. The reason that Songwriters of North America got on board to fight for the passage of the MMA, the Music Modernization Act, is because it created a centralized clearinghouse for mechanical royalties. So because the MLC was created to collect, oversee, and distribute mechanical royalties to songwriters. So it's not perfect, and we're not, we're definitely, songwriters have not been made whole compared to where they were, a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades ago, but it's a start. And so, we're very, very happy about where things are going.
That's great. And I'm going to do a little shameless plug for the MIA Journal. There's actually an article in the MIA Journal about mechanical licensing before and after the MMA. Full disclosure, I wrote that before becoming a part of the MLC. And so I think Armin shared a link to that, but go MIA Journal, woohoo. Okay, so what we want to talk about also, we wanted to kind of take everybody through chronologically what led to the MMA, right? How did we end up there? And so what I want to do now is talk about what happened since the MMA was passed. And what I'd actually like to do is I'm going to share a slide that's a timeline. There's actually a more detailed timeline on the MLC website, but I think it's worth just kind of walking through this so everybody can understand just how much has happened in quite a short amount of time. So let me go ahead now. I'm going to share this, and I'm going to leave it to any of our tech folks to tell me if they cannot see it. Okay, so don't worry. I know the text may be a little small for you. I'm going to read it. All right, so the MMA was signed into law in October 2018. So then it took some time for the designation of the MLC to happen. So from that time through to July 2019, there was a couple different organizations in the industry that had responded to a request for proposals to essentially propose that they become the MLC. They spin up the MLC. And so, the Copyright Office had some time to consider all those proposals, and ultimately decided which entity is going to become the MLC in July of 2019. November 2019, these are milestones on this slide. The MLC selected 2 vendors to provide services to the MLC. One of those is the Harry Fox Agency, and we can dive into that a little later. That's something that comes up in almost every webinar I do about the MLC, is people not understanding that the Harry Fox Agency is not the MLC, and the MLC is not the Harry Fox Agency. They are a vendor who was selected after a selection process to provide certain services to the MLC, one of which was a starter database. So the Harry Fox Agency was selected, and so was a company called Consensus, a software development company, to start building out the MLC portal that everybody accesses now. So December 2019, the MLC and the Digital Licensee Coordinator, the DLC, they reached an agreement about the startup funding for the MLC. So some of you may not realize that the operations of the MLC are funded by the Digital Music Services. That was also set out in the law. And, you know, it was something that could go through a lengthy process in front of the Copyright Royalty Board, but luckily it ended up being resolved or sort of set in motion by an agreement between the DLC and the MLC in terms of how much money was going to be needed to stand up the organization. Because in some ways, the MLC is like a startup in some ways, in terms of going from nothing to having to hire staff, employees, all of that. So that was decided in 2019, December 2019. And then I can say, you know, I'm going to fill in a little bit of a gap here between December 19 and October 2020. The CEO of the company, who some of you might have met at the MIA Meets in the fall, Chris Arend, he was hired in January 2020. And since then has been building out the organization. A number of other leaders came on several months since then. I came on in March of 2020, and many others have since then. And we're working all along to get to the point of actually launching the MLC portal in October 2020. And this is now where Musical Works owners can log in, make sure that their Musical Works data is set up accurately. So that officially launched in October 2020. December 2020, the publicly available database went online. And so now actually, if you go to the MLC website, which is themlc.com, up in the top right corner is an option that says public search. You could click on that and search Musical Works as, to your heart's content, and have your students do that too. So that launched in December 2020. The new blanket license became available January 1st, 2021. And the law, you know, laid out that availability date. And so there was a number of services that started, you know, took advantage of that opportunity right away. There's actually a page on the MLC website you can go to that lists all of those digital services very specifically, which ones are operating under this blanket license. In February 2021, you might have read about an announcement with respect to this in the industry trades. There was a large set of data and money that flowed from the digital services to the MLC that we call the historical unmatched. And so digital services were given an option under the law that if they wanted to do this, they had the benefit of essentially enjoying some liability relief or, you know, shielding from legal liability for this historical unmatched if they transferred the money and the data to the MLC by February 15th. And so many did that to the tune of about $424 million. There is a page on the website also dedicated to historical unmatched, where you can actually see which services that came from and how much money they transferred and what time periods that data refers to. So that was a really big set of incoming information into the MLC, but it was only part one of two parts. Actually, the rest of the data that's needed for any of it to be processed is due into the MLC in mid-June. And so while the MLC has been doing some analysis of this data, it doesn't have a full data set yet to start trying to match and pay that money out. So that process will really dig in heavily after June. And mid-April saw the very first royalty statements being issued by the MLC on time, millions of dollars flowing out to rights holders. And now actually the second set of royalty statements just went out last week. So those milestones were hit. The next big one coming up will be that mid-June delivery of that additional data from the digital services for the historical unmatched. So that gives you a sense of the high level timeline and milestones that have happened so far. As I said, there is a more detailed version of this on the website. These are just some of the highlights. Let me come out of a screen share. Okay. And so lots has been happening, as you can imagine. So let me ask a question in a really just like honest way. I'm going to start with Kay. How's it going? What do you think?
I'm going to get this right eventually. So how is it going with the MLC? How is it going with song? I think what I would like to do is answer for songwriters, like so what we have discovered in the songwriting community is something that we've always known, what I've always even known about myself, which is that I don't speak publisher. I speak songwriter. And the learning curve for songwriters has been, and just to get people to understand that that you have to register, that like, if you don't register your works, if your data is not clean, you're just not going to get paid. And songwriters are not necessarily, weirdly, not necessarily motivated by money. If that, I know this does not make sense at all. Motivated by credit, weirdly enough. It's like someone else is going to take credit for your work. That will get them to sign up. So what we at Sona did, we started a campaign, a sort of multimedia campaign called Sexy Metadata Action Group, to try and convince songwriters that like data is boring, we know, but getting paid and getting credit is sexy. So let's do this together. And so we've just been sort of trying to help songwriters understand that, like, I mean, I'm not sure how deep I should get into that whole thing, but like, so for example, songwriter, you go into the studio, and when people think of metadata, they think of like zeros and ones and bleep, bloop, 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 you know, spaceships and stuff, but it's not. It's like metadata is literally like your name, your PRO, the title of the song, your co-writer, how are you splitting it? All the birth of your metadata begins in the studio when you show up to the studio to write your song that day. And if you can just bring yourself to like when you get into the studio that day, just like agree who's here, what's your PRO. So, you know, having like a split sheet, you know, Sona has developed a split sheet for our members to bring to the studio when, in fact, we do get to go back to studios, which is kind of now. And hopefully we'll begin to understand that clean data is valuable data. And so for when you ask how it's going, the going is slow. And, you know, a lot of songwriters, in terms of like the MLC itself and registering your works, you know, we discovered that, you know, songwriters can't, you know, if you have a publisher, you can't sign up for the MLC because your publisher is administering your works. So there's been some confusion for sure, but the confusion is kind of like baseline across the board, and we're just trying to like untangle the threads.
You mean the MLC didn't fix everything in the last year that's ever happened in the whole music industry? Yeah.
You know, I'm totally unhappy to say they did not. Business, how dare you?
Exactly, some of the expectations, you know. I know. I'll give you two funny metadata things, then I'm gonna kick it to Bob. Back in the day before Music Biz, many of you have gone to Music Biz, was called NARM. There was a metadata summit that was like 2 hours in a room, you know, tiny little room, standing room only. And I remember there was somebody there who I think might've been from Germany. And they were saying one of the things we have to do is figure out how to make this topic more sexy and more interesting. And they were like, let's not call it metadata. Let's call it metadata. Maybe if we call it metadata, it will sound more interesting. So, you know, the search continues, right? Throw the word sexy next to it, credits next to it, whatever it takes to get people to pay attention. And the only other thing I'll say is we did a webinar at the MLC about metadata, and I'm like, okay, it's, you know, so I started off with this, like, friends don't let friends miss out on royalties because of bad metadata. You know, we're trying to do everything we can to make people understand, don't be afraid of it. It's like you said, it's a lot of stuff you know already, and getting it right is going to get you paid. Yeah. So Bob, what do you think? What's your take on how everything's going?
I mean, by the way, it struck me how like it feels like such a long time when you look at it on a year basis, but that, you know, and when you look at even before that 2018 mark you had up there, like even the MMA itself, the bulk of it was really done in just a few month period, even a couple month period. Then things were kind of refined and stuff. And the work that all of the industry bodies did on that is really kind of exceptional. It reminded me of how intense that period was, but how collaborative it frankly was across the board. You know, I think it's really a testament to how broken the system was and how the opportunity for the future kind of was kind of shared by all. But I think things. I just to echo. You know, kind of what was said already, I think, you know, things are going pretty darn good, you know, in my opinion. And I think that when you look at those match rates that have been made publicly available, you look at all of the data that the MLC is putting out there in a public, you know, forum immediately, that transparency has kind of, I think, been an underlying theme, and they've delivered on it. I would be the first to say, you know, there's room for improvement, but I think it's done quite well. And you look at the other thing I mentioned is the match rates are kind of right where you want them to be. And, you know, I think that I certainly, you know, I think anyone would have reasonably have been a little on edge that things perhaps were not going to go as planned, but things are going, I think, better. And, you know, the age-old problems too, though, exist in terms of, you know, it all comes back to the data, and that helps, you know, the matching at the end of the day. And, you know, it's as good as the time you put in there. And that includes what songwriters give to the publishers, or independent artists, you know, include in their data and recordings data when they distribute on open platforms or through distributors. And I think that, you know, as we all work together, it coalesces one single conversation, or at least number of conversations, because there's still so many other sources out there. And I think that we're really, again, more focused than ever as an industry on these issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a couple of other things that have happened, as you can imagine, you know, this organization got stood up at a time of COVID. And so, you know, have obviously leaned heavily into webinars because you couldn't do in-person activities. But now there's going to be absolutely a growing set of in-person type, you know, educational and outreach activities. And there was very recently United States Copyright Office roundtables on unmatched and unpending unclaimed royalties that a number of us participated in, watched. Some of you MIA members might have watched as well. And by the way, if you haven't, and I haven't checked if it's up there now, but the Copyright Office is releasing video recordings of those sessions. So if you are interested in them, they should be or will be soon on the Copyright Office website. But there were some great suggestions that came out of the different sessions there. It was really meant to be sort of a listening event where different voices in the industry could make recommendations, share ideas about things that can be done to help reach the right populations of people who need to take action and get their data set up well so that they can get paid. And so there were certainly a lot of things that came out of that I think the MLC is going to be leaning into, some of which has had to wait until people can do in-person things again. So that's going to be something that I think people are going to start seeing more of in the future as a presence and active role in different events. But certainly that won't be the only thing, because we know some of the hardest people to reach are not the ones going to the conference every year. They're writing songs in their bedroom, and they're kind of like, what is a PRO? What is this? Mechanicals, huh? Those are some of the hardest people to reach that we've got to figure out how to reach. So I want to talk for a minute about some things that I know are on the horizon, and then kind of ask both of you, as you look forward, if you're imagining that we're having this session in like 3 years from now, Mia, and I'm saying, so how's it going? How have the last 3 years been? What you might say in terms of, what you're hoping to see. So just to tee up a couple of sort of really short-term things, right? Actually, the MLC, now it's in a groove of sending out their monthly royalties. We've done 2 of those. This summer, we are going to be launching some really important additional functionality in both the public search screens on the website, as well as the member where members and the public can search the data to find instances where there are recordings that have not been matched to works. We call those unmatched uses, where we have recordings where that activity on a service has not been able to be matched to a musical work, be able to see that. And if you are a member, claim that, sort of say, hey, that recording is actually a recording of this musical work. The MLC, please do, make that data link, right? Data match. And so that capability is going to be rolled out soon. We're looking for a June timeline on that. I can say that, as I mentioned, I wear a couple hats at the MLC, and one of which is working with the committees, which is how I get to know Kay, but I'm also now involved in that claiming portal design work. But so that's coming soon, and I know people are really eager to see that. And the other thing, of course, is the second part of the historical unmatched data, which once it's brought in, then the ingestion of that, and eventually also members being able to see that in these claiming screens and match that so that we can start pumping, pushing that money out to rights holders. That's really probably going to be the big headlines as the year progresses, and then it will just become a part of what we do. And so those are a couple things teeing up. But what other thoughts? And I'll let either one of you jump in first. You can arm wrestle for who goes next. On what kind of things you're looking for down the pipeline. What are you hoping to get to in the next couple of years to be able to say about how it's going?
I mean, I think high tide raises all boats, and I think that the more data gets fixed here, and there's one-stop shopping in one of the biggest territories in the world, that how publishing generally works is you're able to kind of leverage, your data from anywhere and kind of, shoot it back out around the world to make sure things are flowing in the right way, and you're capturing all the right recordings that are associated with works, etc. So I think that's one thing I'm really excited about. I'm really excited about some of the vendors that the MLC may work with to help facilitate better matching and better experience for publishers and writers. And I guess the third thing would be, I think just more data, etc. That is coming through in a unified path, and ultimately helping other vendors and other new products, because the data is publicly available in one-stop shopping, that I think it helps a lot of other new businesses have a little bit of an easier path towards working through who own what rights, especially for non-statutory services, and trying to, make something new that's going to generate revenue for songwriters and publishers in the industry. There's maybe something new that we never would have foreseen, just similar to what happened in the digital fitness space in the last few years, which is an incredible amount of money for the industry.
And actually, I'll just add a little tip. The musical works ownership information is public, right? You can go to public search, but it's more than that. It's available as a full-on bulk download of the entire database. So that's not something a typical person would want. It's not like, I'm just going to couple rows in Excel, right? It's a much bigger data set than that. So it's not for the faint of heart, but to the tune of hundreds of dollars, if not thousands, it's in the hundreds or less range. A company can take a recurring download of the entire musical works ownership database. And then, as Bob was saying, use that in creating new business opportunities. They're allowed to do that. And there's very little limits on how it can be used. So that is something that, I think it's still, companies out there are still kind of, what can I do with this? How might this be beneficial? What can I do with that? Because it's kind of, it's a little unusual to just have that be available. And so again, that was, the credit goes to the MMA, which mandated that the data not only be publicly available, but also publicly available in a bulk format for machine reading, essentially the full database, not just looking it up on the screen. So so that's really interesting to see where that's going to go. Kay, how about you?
Well, I'm to sort of dovetail on what Bob was saying. I think it would be wonderful to see the black box be shrunk down and the unmatched be shrunk down to 0. I would love it if our outreach and education were so effective that we were able to match every song with its rightful owners. And I'm hoping maybe someday we'll be able to utilize audio clips as part of the matching process. That to me just seems like such an obvious thing that, like, if you can't figure out which I Love You title it is, it's like all I have to click on the audio clip and be like, oh, that is mine. That seems obvious, but some things with the statute are harder than others, and some of the pre-existing very complicated licensing rules and laws that we were operating under before could still kind of creep into the process now. So and then I'd really love to see over the next year songwriters and publishers really communicate with each other, so that, because I know for myself, I've been a self-published songwriter for 8 years, but I spent the 18 years before that with a publisher. And so going back to the 90s and finding a song on an album was mistitled, and we may not, so it's being able to find songwriters being able to find and liaise with their publisher to make sure to work together to make sure that that data is clean, that song titles are correct, that splits are correct, that the metadata is pristine.
Yeah, it's the transparency is really a major, a major development here, thanks to the MMA. And so, I know Chris gets this question sometimes, Chris Arend, our CEO, in webinars, and somebody might say, hey, I looked up this song and the data is wrong. And they think that's a bad thing. That's, as a professor, you got an F, the data is wrong. But actually the fact that you could see that it is wrong is fantastic, because if you can see that it's wrong, you can fix it. If you couldn't see it at all you were doing is sort of hoping it would make its way to you. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, maybe nobody claimed it, maybe the wrong party claimed it. And so just being able to see the details, is a really important thing that can get glossed over. And what I think is really, really great for songwriters to know, even if they don't administer any of their works, so maybe a publisher is administering all of their works, there's something called the Data Quality Initiative that the MLC has put together. It's something that they're very excited about, because at least when we started it, we were the only ones doing it, where anybody, even if you're not a member, so let's say you're a songwriter and all of your songs have been administered by Kobalt. If you've got your songs in a spreadsheet of some kind, you can participate in the Data Quality Initiative and send in this spreadsheet of your musical works data. And the MLC will do the analysis to compare that to the database that we have and report back to you if there are any mismatches, like if there's something missing or there's something wrong. And really that gives, again, visibility to where there may be mistakes. And then, if you're a songwriter who's not a member because you have a publisher administering a catalog, you can't fix the data directly with the MLC, but Point K then work more closely with your publisher or publishing administrator to get it fixed, but at least you can see it. I literally last week talked to a lawyer who's based here in Florida who administers the catalog of a very successful songwriter who's been deceased for over a decade. And he saw that something was wrong on the MLC website. And we were like, okay, so let's do some more digging. And guess what? It was wrong on ASCAP as well. And it's like, where's the money been going all this time, I
love that. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, exactly.
It's amazing, and I think it's great because it makes the publishers make sure that they're being, checked too and held accountable, and it creates better competition at the end of the day because it was also, just did disappear. I think it's fantastic. I grew up as a musician, myself, so it's music to my ears that people can. The songwriters too can check all that. Sorry, I get really
pun intended. Yeah, exactly. No, it's great. It is. So I'm conscious of time. So I want to make it a little announcement and then I'll give you guys the last word. Actually, then we can take one or two questions. So for those of you joining, especially if you attended the MIA Meets last fall, you might have created an educator toolkit. And it was really designed for music business professors, could also be used by songwriting professors, music composition professors. And the goal of it, was to help you explain what the MLC is. And the toolkit came with a short video, PowerPoint slides you could use, plus like test questions, discussion, class questions, things like that. So I have two related updates to tell you. Version 2 of the toolkit is almost ready. So that will be rolled out this summer. So you'll have it in time for the fall. It doesn't include any fundamental changes because what we do is still what we do, but it's got some newer slides that help explain things a little better as we've gotten more experience now doing these webinars on a recurring basis. And we're also launching a brand new thing called the Educator Ambassador Program, where as a professor, you'll be able to apply to become an educator ambassador. Don't worry, there's no cost and it's not complicated. We just have to make sure you know what you're talking about so that you don't describe us like, well, the MLC does performance royalties. Like, I need to make sure you know that we don't do that, but it's really not a high bar. So where you can call yourself an educator ambassador. So that is going to be coming soon. Also going to be kind of launched this summer in preparation for the fall semester. I know many of you are wrapping up or have just wrapped up. So keep an eye out for that. I'll be working with Mia to make sure everybody is well aware of those two things when they roll out and, imminently, like probably the beginning of June. So let me actually just do one or two. Let me have a look at the questions to see if there's anything we can knock out quickly. And then I'm going to let Kay and Bob have the last word. One last question I'm going to tee up for them. So hold on one second. I'm going to look at the questions. All right. So someone's asked, and this is not surprising, I get this question all the time, the difference between the Harry Fox Agency, the MLC. I need to get this down to 30 words or less. I'm going to try to be wicked fast. The Harry Fox Agency is a privately owned company, been around a very long time, used to do primarily just mechanical licensing. Over time, expanded to do all kinds of rights-related licensing things, right? The MLC, new creation, governed by a board, nonprofit, a board made up of songwriters, publishers, just totally different kinds of entities altogether. So the MLC has a very specific focus, very specific, narrow focus. United States, blanket digital compulsory mechanicals, full stop, right? Very, very specific. The Harry Fox Agency still is involved in mechanical licensing for physical products. They can still be involved in digital mechanical licensing where the digital service and the publisher have entered into a direct deal that's still allowable by the law. And so the Harry Fox Agency has its portfolio of stuff they do. The MLC has taken over one particular thing that they used to be involved in, which is just compulsory digital mechanical royalties. The MLC MLC is the only party authorized by law to administer this blanket license. The Harry Fox Agency works with the MLC on the back end of things. They provide some different kinds of system support and process support work, but they're just fundamentally a different organization. Get that question all the time. Okay, one other quick one. Can you explain why distribution category match royalties on legal hold? Well, sometimes there are legal issues, right? There may be a lawsuit. There could be a legal dispute over ownership. Two parties both are claiming the same work, and we have a legal conflict or dispute that then needs to be resolved. And there's actually a dispute policy on the MLC website that outlines how that process works. And so, this is not new to the MLC. This happens really with not only all the kind of collective rights management organizations, but publishers, record companies, really any party that pays royalties has some kind of process in place where if there is a lawsuit filed, a legal claim filed, something like that, the monies go on hold until it can be resolved. So that's my guess. All right. So being conscious of time, I'm going to give these two guys a last word. So your last thoughts on if there was one thing that you want the MIA member professors to convey to their music business students, songwriting students, what's the one thing you want to make sure that they help get across to them when they're talking about the MLC? Whoever wants to go first. I didn't pre-warn you about this. I'm sorry.
That's a hard question. Like the one thing?
One thing, at least one thing. Doesn't have to be the one only thing. Last thoughts.
Can I use an expletive?
I think we're all adults here.
Get your data shit together.
Fantastic. Fantastic. All right. How about you, Bob?
Lean in and engage. It's It's one of the biggest income sources in the biggest territory in the world for music. Again, it all kind of starts there in some sense.
Well, thank you very much, Kay. Thank you, Bob, for joining me on this panel. Thank you, Mia, my brethren. Love you guys. And we'll kick it over to, I'm probably on a little break till the next session. So I'll see many of you guys in the happy hour wrap up later. All right.
Thanks,
bye,
Serona.
Thanks
nice
for
to
having
meet you,
us.
Bob.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.